I was paid $10,000 to destroy the most powerful man in this city tonight. The words echoed in Mia Parker's mind as she stood outside the towering glass entrance of Whitmore Grand Restaurant, her fingers tightening around the thin strap of her worn handbag. The wind from the Manhattan Avenue rushed past her coat, carrying the scent of rain and expensive perfume from guests stepping out of black luxury cars. Inside that building waited Lucas Whitmore, the billionaire chief executive officer whose name filled business magazines and television interviews across the country. And tonight, Mia had been hired to humiliate him. Just 1 hour earlier, she had been sitting in a quiet corner booth at a small diner on the Lower East Side, when a woman in a tailored ivory coat slid into the seat across from her. The woman introduced herself as Victoria Hale, speaking with the calm confidence of someone who had never worried about rent or grocery bills in her life. Without hesitation, she placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside was more money than Mia had ever seen in one place. Victoria leaned forward slightly and said that Lucas Whitmore was about to attend a blind date arranged by his mother, and that Victoria wanted that evening to become an unforgettable disaster. All Mia had to do was pretend to be the date, embarrass Lucas, and make sure he never wanted to see her again. Mia had stared at the money for a long moment. Her rent was overdue. Her student loans were piling up. Her mother's medical bills had nearly emptied her savings. Saying yes had felt less like a decision and more like gravity pulling her downward. Now she stood beneath the glowing gold lights of the restaurant entrance, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Mia finally pushed the glass door open and stepped inside. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around her immediately, along with the quiet murmur of wealthy conversations and the soft clink of silverware against porcelain plates. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. Waiters in black suits moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Mia felt painfully out of place in her simple dark dress and thrift store heels, but she forced herself to keep walking. At the far end of the dining room, she spotted him. Lucas Whitmore sat alone at a candlelit table near the tall windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Even from across the room, he was unmistakable. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The kind of man who seemed completely comfortable in a world built from power and wealth. Mia felt her heartbeat rise as she approached the table. This was the man she had been hired to ruin. Yet when Lucas looked up and their eyes met, something unexpected happened. Instead of annoyance or arrogance, he gave her a calm and surprisingly warm smile, as if he had been waiting for her all evening. And in that quiet moment, Mia realized something deeply unsettling. Destroying this blind date might be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The warm smile from Lucas Whitmore lingered for a moment as Mia Parker slowly approached the table, every step across the polished marble floor feeling heavier than the last. She reminded herself why she was there. $10,000. Enough money to stop the letters from the hospital, enough to keep the electricity on in her tiny apartment for months, enough to finally breathe without counting every dollar in her wallet. That was the reason she had accepted Victoria Hale's offer. All she had to do was ruin this evening. Lucas stood up as Mia reached the table, pulling the chair out for her with an easy, practiced motion that suggested he had been raised around formal dinners and powerful conversations. Up close, he looked even more composed than she expected. His dark hair was neatly styled, his posture relaxed, his eyes sharp but calm. "Good evening," he said in a voice that was steady and low. "You must be Mia." The sound of her own name coming from him caught her slightly off guard. For a split second, she wondered how he knew it, then remembered that the blind date arrangement must have included her name. "Yes," she answered, forcing a casual shrug as she sat down. "That is me." Lucas returned to his seat across from her and studied her with a quiet curiosity that made Mia suddenly aware of every scuff on her shoes and every loose thread on her dress sleeve. The candlelight flickered between them, reflecting softly in the tall windows that overlooked the busy avenue outside. A waiter approached and poured water into crystal glasses before handing them menus. Lucas glanced at his menu only briefly before looking back up. "I hope the traffic was not too bad tonight," he said politely. Mia almost laughed. If he only knew that she had walked nearly half a mile through the cold to get here, because subway delays had eaten the last of her time. It was fine, she said quickly. Now the plan had to begin. Victoria had been very clear about what Mia needed to do. Be loud. Be embarrassing. Make him regret agreeing to this date. Mia leaned back in her chair and dropped the menu onto the table with a soft thud. So, Lucas Whitmore, she said casually, letting his full name hang in the air. I have read a little about you online. Billionaire technology genius, youngest chief executive officer on the East Coast. Something like that, right? Lucas gave a small amused smile. Something like that, yes. Mia tilted her head and decided to push harder. You know what I always wonder about men like you? Lucas rested his elbows lightly on the table. What is that? Whether all that money makes you interesting or just really boring. The words were sharp enough that a couple at the next table briefly glanced over. Mia expected Lucas to stiffen or become irritated. Instead, he let out a quiet laugh that surprised her. That is a fair question, he said. I suppose that depends on the person asking it. Mia blinked. That was not the reaction she expected at all. Most wealthy men she had encountered during catering shifts either became defensive or dismissive when someone challenged them. Lucas Whitmore looked entertained. She tried again. So tell me, do you actually enjoy these blind dates your mother keeps arranging for you? Lucas leaned back slightly and considered the question for a moment. Honestly, not particularly, he admitted. But my mother believes that meeting people outside of my usual circle might be good for me. Mia crossed her arms. And you agree just like that. Lucas lifted one shoulder slightly. Sometimes it is easier to say yes to family than to argue. The honesty in his tone created a strange pause between them. Mia felt the first flicker of doubt about the job she had accepted. She quickly reminded herself that this man was still the powerful billionaire she had been hired to embarrass. The waiter returned to take their order, and Mia decided to push the performance further. Without even opening the menu again, she said loudly, I will take the most expensive steak you have, and whatever red wine costs the most money tonight. Lucas raised an eyebrow slightly, but did not object. The waiter nodded politely and left. Mia leaned forward again, preparing another insult, but before she could speak, Lucas glanced toward a nearby table where a young server had accidentally dropped a tray of glasses. The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed across the dining room, followed by the nervous apology of the server as the restaurant manager rushed over with visible frustration. Lucas immediately stood up and walked over to the scene. Mia watched in confusion as he calmly told the manager that accidents happened and that no one should be embarrassed for doing their best during a busy evening. He even helped pick up a few larger pieces of glass before returning to the table. Mia stared at him as he sat down again, suddenly unsure of the script she had prepared in her mind. The man she had been hired to humiliate did not look arrogant or cruel. If anything, he looked patient. And that made the task in front of her far more complicated than she had expected. For several seconds after Lucas Whitmore returned to his seat, Mia Parker simply watched him, unsure what to say next. The quiet confidence he had shown while helping the nervous server had unsettled her more than any insult ever could. That had not been part of the story Victoria Hale told earlier that evening. According to Victoria, Lucas Whitmore was supposed to be cold, arrogant, and impossible to embarrass because he believed he was better than everyone around him. Yet the man sitting across the candlelit table now looked nothing like that description. Lucas lifted his water glass and took a calm sip before noticing Mia studying him. Something wrong? He asked gently. Mia quickly looked away and forced a careless shrug. I was just wondering if billionaires always clean up broken glass at restaurants, or if that is one of your hidden hobbies. Lucas smiled faintly. I suppose it depends on whether the billionaire remembers what it felt like to be the person dropping the tray. Mia frowned slightly. What do you mean by that? Lucas rested his hands loosely on the table. During my first year of college, I worked in a small diner outside Boston. I carried trays there every night after class. Dropped more than a few plates myself. Mia blinked in surprise. That detail had never appeared in any of the business articles she had seen about him. For a moment, she almost asked another honest question, but she remembered the envelope of money sitting on her kitchen counter and the job she had been hired to finish. She leaned forward and decided to push her act further. Well then, Mr. Whitmore, she said loudly enough for a nearby table to hear, I hope your diner experience prepared you for a very expensive dinner tonight. Because I am absolutely planning to enjoy that steak. Lucas chuckled softly. I would be disappointed if you did not. The waiter soon returned carrying a large tray with 2 plates of food and a bottle of deep red wine. As the plates were set down, Mia glanced at the steak in front of her and exaggerated her reaction. Wow, she said, leaning back in her chair. I think this steak probably costs more than my entire grocery bill for a week. Lucas picked up his fork and knife calmly. Then tonight must be a special evening. Mia tried again to provoke him. So tell me something, Lucas. When you wake up every morning in one of those giant penthouse apartments I see in the magazines, do you ever worry about normal things like rent or medical bills or gas money? Lucas paused before answering. Not anymore, he admitted quietly. But I used to. Mia studied his expression carefully. There was no arrogance in his voice. Just simple honesty. She stabbed a small piece of steak with her fork and took a bite, pretending to be unimpressed even though it might have been the best food she had tasted in months. Lucas watched her reaction with mild amusement. You do not look convinced, he said. Mia wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin. It is fine, she replied casually. But if you really want to impress someone, you should try the cheeseburgers at the diner near my apartment. Those are unforgettable. Lucas leaned forward slightly with interest. Where is this famous diner? Lower East Side, she answered. A place called Riverside Grill. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. I might have to try that sometime. Mia almost laughed at the image of this powerful technology executive sitting on a cracked vinyl stool in that small neighborhood diner. But before she could respond, something else caught her attention. At a table across the room, a sharply dressed woman had just entered the restaurant and was scanning the dining area slowly. Mia recognized her immediately. Victoria Hale, the woman who had hired her. Victoria had not expected to arrive so soon, and the cold focus in her eyes made Mia suddenly nervous. Lucas noticed Mia glance toward the entrance and turned his head slightly to follow her gaze. Do you know that woman? He asked casually. Mia quickly looked back at him and shook her head. No, she said a little too quickly. Just thought she looked familiar. But inside Mia felt a knot of tension tighten in her stomach. Because if Victoria Hale was already here, then the simple performance she had planned for this dinner might be about to turn into something far more complicated. The presence of Victoria Hale near the entrance sent a quiet shock through Mia Parker that she tried desperately to hide behind a calm expression. She lowered her eyes to the plate in front of her and cut another small piece of steak, pretending nothing had changed, but her thoughts were racing. Victoria had promised that she would not appear at the restaurant. The entire plan depended on Mia acting alone, making the evening collapse naturally so Lucas Whitmore would never suspect someone had arranged it. If Victoria walked over to their table now, everything could unravel in seconds. Across from her, Lucas seemed completely unaware of the tension building in Mia's chest. He lifted his wine glass and studied her with the same quiet curiosity he had shown all evening. You look like something just crossed your mind, he said calmly. Mia forced a quick smile and took a sip of water to buy herself a moment. Just thinking about work tomorrow, she replied. Lucas tilted his head slightly. Long hours. Something like that, Mia answered. The truth was that she did not have a stable job anymore. She picked up catering shifts when she could, waited tables occasionally, and spent most evenings worrying about overdue bills. But tonight she had been hired to play a very different role. Mia glanced again toward the entrance. Victoria had moved deeper into the restaurant and now stood near the bar speaking quietly with a staff member. From the angle of her body, it looked as if she was waiting, watching. Mia felt the silent pressure of that gaze even though she could not see it directly. She remembered Victoria's cold voice earlier that evening in the diner. Make sure he regrets ever sitting down tonight. Mia swallowed and decided she needed to push the performance harder before Victoria decided to intervene herself. She set her fork down loudly on the plate and leaned back in her chair. You know what, Lucas, she said with deliberate exaggeration, I have to admit something. This entire evening feels a little strange to me. Lucas rested his hands on the table and listened. Strange how? Mia waved her hand toward the elegant dining room around them. All this. The chandeliers, the expensive wine, the people pretending to whisper while they stare at us. It feels like I accidentally walked into someone else's movie. Lucas followed her gesture with his eyes and then looked back at her with a calm smile. I understand that feeling more than you might think. Mia raised an eyebrow. Really? Because it seems like you belong perfectly in places like this. Lucas took a slow breath before answering. Appearances can be misleading. For a moment his voice carried a quiet seriousness that made Mia hesitate. Then she remembered the envelope of money again and forced herself to continue the act. Well, since we are being honest, she said loudly, I should probably tell you that blind dates are not exactly my style either. Lucas leaned forward slightly with interest. What would be your style then? Mia shrugged and gestured vaguely. Something normal. Maybe a cheap diner. Greasy burgers. Loud music from an old jukebox. No one wearing suits that cost more than my rent. Lucas laughed softly at that image. That actually sounds refreshing. Mia blinked again. Every attempt to embarrass him seemed to slide harmlessly away. It was almost as if Lucas Whitmore refused to be offended. Before Mia could think of another strategy, Lucas glanced briefly across the room. His eyes paused for a moment. On the figure near the bar, Victoria Hale. When he looked back at Mia, there was a subtle change in his expression. Not anger. Not surprise. Something more thoughtful. Mia suddenly wondered if he had already noticed her presence long before she did. Lucas lifted his glass again and spoke in a calm voice that carried a hint of curiosity. Tell me something, Mia. If someone asked you to play a role tonight, what kind of character do you think you would be? The question struck Mia like a sudden flash of lightning. For a second she could not breathe, because the way Lucas said it made the entire restaurant feel very quiet, as if he already knew there was a story she was not telling. Lucas Whitmore did not break eye contact after asking his quiet question, and for a moment Mia Parker felt as if the entire restaurant had fallen silent around them. Tell me something, Mia. If someone asked you to play a role tonight, what kind of character do you think you would be? The words echoed in her mind while the candle between them flickered gently. Mia forced a small laugh and leaned back in her chair as if the question had not shaken her at all. I would probably be the character who orders expensive food and pretends she belongs here, she replied lightly. Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly as if accepting the answer, though there was still a thoughtful expression behind his calm eyes. Well, if that is the role tonight, he said, I think you are performing it very convincingly. Mia picked up her fork again, but the knot in her stomach had grown tighter. Something about Lucas's tone made her wonder if he had meant more than the simple question itself. She tried to focus on the act she was supposed to continue. Across the room, Victoria Hale remained near the bar, pretending to scroll through her phone while occasionally glancing toward their table. The message was clear. Finish the job. Mia took a slow breath and leaned forward again. You know, Lucas, she said, there is something else I have always wondered about men like you. Lucas lifted his eyebrows slightly. I am beginning to think I should be worried about these questions. Mia smirked as if amused by her own boldness. Do you ever get tired of people pretending to like you because of your money? Lucas did not answer immediately. Instead, he rested his hands on the table and considered her carefully. Yes, he said quietly after a moment. That does happen sometimes. Mia blinked. The honesty again caught her off guard. She had expected arrogance, maybe even anger, but Lucas spoke with a calm sincerity that made her feel strangely uncomfortable about the role she was playing. So how do you tell who actually likes you? She asked before she could stop herself. Lucas smiled faintly. That is the difficult part. Usually you cannot tell until much later. Mia lowered her gaze to the table. For a brief second, guilt flickered through her thoughts, because in this moment she knew exactly what he meant. She was sitting here pretending to be someone she was not, all because of the envelope of money waiting in her apartment. Lucas noticed her silence and gently changed the subject. Tell me something about you instead, he said. What do you actually enjoy doing when you are not interrogating strangers at dinner? Mia hesitated. Talking about herself had not been part of the plan, but the question felt genuine, not forced. I like to draw sometimes, she admitted quietly. Lucas leaned forward with interest. Draw what? Mostly people, she said. Faces. Expressions. Moments when someone forgets they are being watched. Lucas's eyes brightened slightly. That sounds like a talent for observation. Mia shrugged, suddenly shy. It is just a hobby. Lucas shook his head gently. Many great things begin as hobbies. Mia looked up, and for a moment their eyes met in a quiet understanding that surprised her. Then the spell broke when a voice from behind them spoke sharply. I see you are enjoying the evening. Mia froze instantly. She recognized that voice before she even turned her head. Victoria Hale had walked directly to their table. Lucas turned slowly in his chair and looked up at her with calm curiosity. Victoria gave him a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Good evening, Lucas, she said. I hope your blind date is going exactly as planned. Mia felt the air around the table grow heavy with tension. Because Victoria had not come here to stay invisible anymore. She had come to watch the ending of the story she had started. And suddenly Mia realized that whatever happened next might expose everything. Victoria Hale remained standing beside the table with a smile that was polite on the surface but sharp beneath it, the kind of smile that carried intention rather than warmth. Mia Parker felt her heartbeat quicken as the carefully balanced evening suddenly tilted towards something unpredictable. Lucas Whitmore looked up at Victoria calmly, as if her sudden appearance had not surprised him at all. "Victoria," he said evenly, "I did not realize you were dining here tonight." Victoria placed one hand lightly on the back of an empty chair near the table and glanced between them. "I was not planning to stay long," she replied smoothly. "I simply thought I would stop by and see how your evening was going." Her eyes shifted to Mia with quiet scrutiny. "And it seems you found quite an interesting companion." Mia forced a neutral expression even though every instinct told her that Victoria had arrived to push the situation further. Lucas noticed the tension in Mia's posture and spoke before she could respond. "Mia and I were just having dinner," he said. "You are welcome to join us if you would like." Victoria laughed softly as if the suggestion amused her. "Oh no, Lucas. I would never want to interrupt such a charming blind date." Her tone carried a subtle emphasis on the last words. Mia could feel the weight of Victoria's gaze pressing against her like a silent command. "Cause the disaster. Finish what you started." Lucas watched the exchange with thoughtful attention. For a brief moment his eyes rested on Victoria's face, then returned to Mia. There was something quietly observant in the way he studied both women. Victoria stepped back slightly from the table, but did not leave. "I will not stay long," she said. "I only wanted to see whether Lucas was enjoying himself tonight." Lucas leaned back in his chair and folded his hands loosely. "Actually," he said calmly, "I was enjoying the conversation very much." Victoria raised an eyebrow as if that answer amused her. "That is surprising," she said lightly, "because I heard that your evening might turn out differently." Mia felt a sudden chill run through her chest. The words sounded dangerously close to exposing everything. Lucas remained composed. "Sometimes rumors exaggerate things," he replied. Victoria glanced at Mia again. "Yes, sometimes they do." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Mia realized she had only one way to keep control of the situation. She leaned forward suddenly and spoke with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Well, since everyone seems curious about our evening," she said, "let me make it more entertaining." Lucas turned his head slightly toward her, clearly interested in what she might say next. Mia picked up her wine glass and held it up. "To unexpected dinners," she declared loudly. "The kind where two strangers sit across from each other and discover absolutely nothing in common." A few guests nearby glanced over, clearly aware of the rising tension at the table. Victoria watched closely, waiting to see how Lucas would react. But Lucas simply lifted his own glass and touched it lightly to Mia's. "To unexpected conversations," he corrected calmly. "Sometimes those are the most interesting ones." Mia lowered her glass slowly, surprised again by how effortlessly he refused to be offended. Victoria's smile thinned slightly, as if the moment had not unfolded the way she expected. Lucas looked up at her again. "Are you certain you do not want to sit down for a moment, Victoria?" Victoria shook her head and stepped away from the table. "No," she said. "I have seen enough for tonight." Her eyes met Mia's one last time, and there was a clear message in them. "Do not forget why you are here." Then Victoria turned and walked slowly toward the exit of the restaurant. Mia watched her leave, the pressure in her chest easing slightly once the door closed behind her. Lucas looked back at Mia and tilted his head thoughtfully. "That was an interesting interruption," he said. Mia forced a small laugh, even though her mind was racing. "Yeah," she replied quietly. "Interesting is one way to describe it." Lucas studied her expression for another moment before speaking again. "I get the feeling tonight is not unfolding the way someone expected." Mia looked at him sharply. "What do you mean by that?" Lucas gave a calm half-smile. "Let us just say that sometimes the most carefully planned evenings end up revealing the most honest truths." Mia stared at him in silence, suddenly wondering if Lucas Whitmore understood far more about this situation than anyone had realized. For a long moment after Victoria Hale disappeared through the restaurant doors, the air between Mia Parker and Lucas Whitmore remained strangely quiet. The sounds of the dining room slowly returned around them, the gentle clinking of glasses, the the soft conversations from nearby tables, the low hum of music drifting from hidden speakers in the ceiling. But Mia could still feel the tension lingering from Victoria's visit like a shadow that had not fully left the room. Lucas leaned back in his chair and watched Mia carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than suspicious. Finally, he spoke in a calm voice. "That woman seemed to know you." Mia forced a small shrug and picked up her fork again, pretending to focus on the food in front of her. "People sometimes think they recognize strangers in places like this," she said lightly. Lucas nodded slowly but did not immediately respond. Instead, he studied the candlelight reflecting in the wine glass between them. Mia could feel that quiet observation again, the same calm attention he had shown all evening. It made her uneasy in a way she could not explain. She had expected Lucas Whitmore to react like many powerful men did when their evening was disrupted. Anger, pride, offended silence. Instead, he simply seemed curious. After a moment, Lucas leaned forward slightly. "May I ask you something honestly, Mia?" She looked up at him cautiously. "Depends on the question." Lucas smiled faintly. "Fair answer. Then let me ask it this way. If tonight were a story, what would the truth of that story be?" Mia froze. The question felt simple on the surface, yet something in the way he asked it made her heart beat faster. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Because for the first time that evening, she realized how tired she felt pretending to be someone else. Lucas noticed the hesitation in her eyes. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to," he said gently. "I only meant that sometimes people meet in unusual circumstances." Mia looked down at her hands resting on the table. They were trembling slightly. The longer she sat across from Lucas, the harder it became to follow the plan she had accepted earlier that night. Victoria's voice still echoed in her mind. "Make sure he regrets sitting down tonight." But Lucas did not look like a man who deserved humiliation. He looked like someone who was simply trying to understand the person across from him. Mia let out a slow breath. "Can I ask you something instead?" she said quietly. Lucas nodded. "Of course." Mia lifted her eyes to meet his. "Why did you really agree to this blind date?" Lucas leaned back slightly and considered the question. "My mother believes I spend too much time working," he answered honestly. "She arranged the evening because she thinks meeting new people might remind me there is more to life than building companies." Mia studied him carefully. "And what do you think?" Lucas smiled faintly. "I think my mother worries about me more than she admits." Mia could not help returning a small smile. "That sounds like something my mother would say too." Lucas noticed the warmth that briefly replaced her earlier sarcasm. For the first time that evening, Mia looked less like someone performing a role and more like herself. Lucas reached for the wine bottle and refilled both of their glasses slowly. Then he spoke again, his voice calm but direct. "Mia, I want to tell you something." She felt her stomach tighten slightly. "What is it?" Lucas looked at her with quiet sincerity. "When you walked into this restaurant tonight, I knew immediately that you were not the person my mother originally arranged for me to meet." Mia stared at him in shock. For a second, she could not breathe. Lucas continued gently. "The name my mother gave me was different, but I decided not to say anything." Mia felt the entire room spin slightly around her. "You knew?" she whispered. Lucas nodded. "Yes. And yet I still chose to stay at the table. Because I was curious about the real reason you came here tonight." The words hung in the air between them like a quiet storm waiting to break. Mia Parker stared at Lucas Whitmore, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it across the table. "When you walked into this restaurant tonight, I knew immediately that you were not the person my mother arranged for me to meet." The sentence repeated in her mind again and again. Lucas had known the entire time. Every awkward joke, every attempt she made to embarrass him, every exaggerated comment about money and wealth. He had known and still chose to stay. Mia slowly set her wine glass down, realizing her hand had begun to tremble. "You knew from the beginning?" she whispered. Lucas nodded calmly, his expression patient rather than accusing. "Yes." Mia shook her head in disbelief. "Then why did you not say anything?" Lucas leaned back slightly in his chair and folded his hands loosely on the table. "Because I wanted to understand the reason you came here," he answered honestly. "And because you looked nervous in a way that did not feel dishonest." Mia let out a quiet breath she had been holding without realizing it. The restaurant suddenly felt warmer than before. Lucas continued speaking in the same calm voice. "When you first sat down, you were trying very hard to appear confident. But your eyes kept watching the room, as if you were expecting something to go wrong." Mia lowered her gaze. Every word he said was painfully accurate. And then, Lucas continued, I noticed the woman who walked in earlier tonight. Victoria Hale. Mia looked up sharply. Lucas nodded slowly. Yes, I know her. Mia felt the tension in her chest tighten again. Lucas rested his elbows lightly on the table and spoke with quiet clarity. Victoria and I were engaged several years ago. The relationship ended badly. Mia blinked in surprise. That had not been part of the story Victoria told earlier that evening. Lucas continued. When she walked into the restaurant tonight, I realized something else. Mia swallowed nervously. What was that? Lucas looked directly at her. That she was probably the reason you came here. The truth was now sitting between them, impossible to ignore. Mia could feel the weight of it pressing against her conscience. For a long moment she said nothing. Lucas did not rush her. He simply waited with the same patient expression that had disarmed her all evening. Finally Mia spoke in a quiet voice that carried more honesty than anything she had said before. She offered me money. Lucas nodded slightly as if he had already expected that answer. Mia continued slowly. She said you were arrogant. That humiliating you would be easy. That I only needed to make the evening uncomfortable so you would regret agreeing to the date. Lucas listened without interrupting. Mia forced herself to continue. I needed the money. My mother has been dealing with medical bills, and I am barely keeping my apartment. When she put that envelope on the table, it felt like the only option I had. The confession left Mia feeling strangely exposed, as if she had just removed the mask she had been wearing since the moment she walked into the restaurant. Lucas studied her expression carefully. There was no anger in his eyes, only understanding. You could have told me that earlier, he said gently. Mia gave a tired laugh. Somehow, I do not think telling the truth was part of the job description. Lucas smiled faintly at that. Probably not. The candlelight flickered softly between them again, and for the first time since the evening began, Mia felt the strange tension easing from her shoulders. Lucas lifted his wine glass and looked at her thoughtfully. So the real question now is what happens next. Mia frowned slightly. What do you mean? Lucas leaned forward with a calm, almost playful expression. You were hired to ruin my blind date. Technically, that mission is not finished yet. Mia stared at him in confusion. Lucas's smile widened slightly. And I am curious to see how the story ends when both people at the table finally know the truth. For several seconds after Lucas Whitmore finished speaking, Mia Parker sat in complete silence, staring at the candlelight dancing between them. The entire truth of the evening had been placed on the table now, and the strange tension that once came from secrets had shifted into something deeper. Lucas leaned back comfortably in his chair, as if the confession had only made the dinner more interesting. You were hired to ruin my blind date, he repeated calmly. Technically, the mission is still incomplete. Mia let out a breath that sounded halfway between a laugh and a sigh. I think I failed that job pretty badly, she admitted. Lucas tilted his head slightly. That depends on how you define failure. Mia raised an eyebrow. I was supposed to make you angry, she said. Or embarrassed. Or at least uncomfortable enough to walk away. Lucas smiled faintly. And yet here I am still sitting here. Mia shook her head slowly, still trying to understand his reaction. Most people would have thrown me out of the restaurant by now. Lucas glanced around the elegant dining room for a moment before returning his gaze to her. Most people might have. But this evening stopped being a simple blind date the moment you told the truth. Mia looked down at the tablecloth, her thoughts swirling with conflicting emotions. The guilt of what she had done still weighed on her, but there was also relief in finally admitting it. She reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip before speaking again. You should still be angry with me, she said quietly. I came here to make a fool out of you. Lucas shook his head gently. No, Mia. You came here because someone offered you money when you needed help. Those are two very different things. Mia felt the words settle somewhere deep in her chest. No one had ever described her situation with that kind of calm understanding before. Lucas leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. Tell me something honestly, he said. If Victoria had not offered you that envelope earlier tonight, where would you be right now? Mia hesitated before answering. Probably working a late shift somewhere. Or at home worrying about rent again. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps tonight was not entirely a bad decision after all. Mia gave a small, incredulous laugh. I tried to sabotage your evening. Lucas smiled again. Yes, and instead we ended up having a very honest conversation. Mia studied his expression carefully. The more she looked at him, the harder it became to see the arrogant billionaire Victoria had described. Instead, she saw a man who seemed strangely comfortable with imperfection and unpredictability. Lucas lifted his wine glass once more and looked at her with quiet curiosity. There is still one part of the story I do not understand, though. Mia looked up. What part? Lucas spoke calmly. Victoria wanted this evening to become a disaster. But you never truly tried to destroy it. Mia frowned slightly. I tried. Lucas shook his head. Not really. You teased me about money, yes. But you never crossed the line into cruelty. Mia thought about that for a moment. He was right. Even when she had pushed the act, something inside her had held back. Lucas noticed the realization forming in her expression. That is why I kept listening to you, he said gently. Because the person sitting across from me never felt like someone pretending to be cruel. Mia felt a warmth rise in her chest that she could not easily explain. The waiter returned quietly to clear their plates, leaving the two of them alone again with the soft glow of candlelight. Lucas watched Mia for another moment before speaking again. So now the question becomes something different, he said. Mia folded her hands together on the table. What question? Lucas leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but curious. Now that the truth is out, what do you want to do with the rest of the evening? Mia stared at him in surprise. What do you mean? Lucas gestured lightly around the restaurant. We can end the dinner here and pretend the night never happened. Or we can start over and have a real conversation between two people who are no longer pretending to be anyone else. Mia felt her heartbeat quicken slightly at the unexpected choice he had just offered. For the first time since she walked into the restaurant, the evening no longer felt like a job or a performance. It felt like a decision. And Mia Parker suddenly realized that whatever she said next might change everything. The quiet question Lucas Whitmore asked seemed to settle over the table like the soft glow of the candle between them. Now that the truth is out, what do you want to do with the rest of the evening? Mia Parker felt her heart beating faster as she looked at him. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background again while she considered the unexpected choice he had placed in front of her. A few hours earlier she had walked into this building with a clear plan. Cause a scene. Embarrass the billionaire. Walk away with the envelope of money Victoria Hale had offered. But nothing about the night had followed that script. Mia let out a slow breath and leaned back slightly in her chair. I think the disaster part of the evening already failed, she said quietly. Lucas smiled faintly. My father passed away when I was in college. I moved to New York a few years ago hoping to build a better life. Lucas listened with genuine attention. And the drawing you mentioned earlier, he said. Is that something you studied? Mia shook her head slightly. No. I studied communications for a while, but had to leave school when my mother became sick. Since then I have just been working different jobs to keep things going. Lucas nodded slowly, absorbing every detail she shared. Thank you for telling me the real story, he said. Mia shrugged gently. It feels strange saying it out loud. Lucas rested his hands on the table again. Honesty often does it first. Mia looked at him thoughtfully for a moment. All right, your turn. Lucas smiled. Fair enough. He took a small sip of wine before continuing. I grew up outside Boston. My father was an engineer and my mother taught literature at a local college. They believed that hard work could solve almost any problem. Mia tilted her head slightly. That explains the work ethic reputation you have in the business world. Lucas gave a quiet laugh. That reputation is probably exaggerated. But I did build my first technology company while I was still in college. Mia leaned forward with curiosity. The software company everyone talks about. Lucas nodded. Yes. It started as a small project between a few friends and eventually grew into something larger than we expected. Mia studied him carefully. And now you run one of the most successful companies in the country. Lucas shrugged modestly. Success depends on how you measure it. Mia noticed that same calm humility again, the trait that had made it impossible for her to treat him like the villain Victoria had described. For several minutes, they continued talking, this time without any pretenses. Mia described the neighborhood where she lived and the tiny apartment she struggled to afford. Lucas shared stories about the early years of his company and the long nights spent writing code in a cramped office. The conversation flowed naturally, as if the tension that had filled the evening earlier had quietly disappeared. Eventually, the waiter returned to ask whether they would like dessert. Lucas glanced at Mia. What do you think? Mia smiled slightly. If we are truly starting over, she said, then I think dessert is allowed. Lucas nodded to the waiter and ordered 2 slices of chocolate cake. As the waiter walked away, Mia shook her head in mild disbelief. This evening has been the strangest blind date I have ever experienced. Lucas leaned back in his chair and looked at her thoughtfully. It may also be the most honest one I have had in a very long time. Mia felt warmth rise in her chest at the sincerity in his voice. For the first time since she stepped into the restaurant, she no longer felt like an outsider playing a role. Instead, she felt like someone who had unexpectedly found a moment of real connection. But somewhere outside the restaurant walls, another person was still watching the outcome of the night with very different expectations. And neither Mia nor Lucas yet realized that Victoria Hale had not finished trying to control the ending of this story. The chocolate cake arrived a few minutes later, placed gently on the table between Mia Parker and Lucas Whitmore. The rich scent of warm chocolate rose softly into the air as the waiter stepped away, leaving them once again alone in the quiet glow of candlelight. Mia looked down at the dessert and shook her head with a small smile. I cannot remember the last time I had something this fancy, she admitted. Lucas picked up his fork with a relaxed expression. Then tonight is officially a celebration of unexpected decisions. Mia laughed softly and took a small bite. For a moment, the evening felt strangely peaceful, almost normal, as if the complicated beginning of their meeting had faded into the background. They continued talking easily, sharing small stories about their lives that had nothing to do with money or business. Mia told him about the little coffee shop near her apartment where the owner always played old jazz music in the mornings. Lucas described the small lake near his childhood home where he used to go fishing with his father on quiet weekends. The conversation flowed with a natural rhythm that neither of them had expected when the night began. Eventually, Mia placed her fork down and leaned back slightly in her chair. I should probably say something else honestly, she said quietly. Lucas looked at her with calm curiosity. Go ahead. Mia folded her hands together on the table. I cannot take the money Victoria offered me. Lucas watched her carefully, but did not interrupt. Mia continued speaking slowly. When she gave me that envelope earlier tonight, it felt like the only way to fix my problems. But after sitting here and hearing your story, it does not feel right anymore. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. I wondered whether you might reach that conclusion. Mia looked surprised. You expected that? Lucas gave a small smile. I suspected that the person who hesitated before insulting me earlier was not someone who enjoyed hurting people. Mia let out a quiet breath. I will return the money to her tomorrow. Lucas considered her words for a moment. That is an honorable decision, he said. But it may also create complications for you. Mia shrugged gently. Life is already complicated. At least this way I will be able to sleep tonight without feeling like I betrayed someone who did not deserve it. Lucas studied her expression carefully. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. After a moment, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a simple business card on the table between them. Mia looked down at it curiously. The card displayed the name Lucas Whitmore and the logo of his technology company beneath it. Mia raised her eyes toward him in confusion. What is this for? Lucas spoke calmly. You mentioned earlier that you have been struggling to find stable work. Mia nodded slowly. Lucas tapped the card gently with one finger. My company supports several community programs in the city, including an art education initiative for young students and hospital outreach programs. We occasionally hire coordinators to help manage those projects. Mia stared at the card for a moment before looking back at him. Are you offering me a job? Lucas shook his head lightly. Not exactly. I am offering you an opportunity to apply. The decision would still be made by the program director. But I believe you would bring honesty and perspective to the role. Mia felt a mixture of surprise and disbelief. You barely know me, she said quietly. Lucas smiled slightly. I know enough to believe that someone who chooses integrity over easy money deserves a chance. Mia looked down at the card again, the simple piece of paper suddenly feeling heavier than the envelope Victoria had given her earlier that night. Lucas leaned back in his chair once more. Of course there is no obligation, he added. You are free to decline. Mia closed her fingers around the card slowly. I think I would like to try, she said softly. Lucas nodded approvingly. Good. For a moment neither of them spoke. The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening moved toward its late hours. Mia realized that the strange blind date she had been hired to destroy had transformed into something completely different. Something neither of them had planned. Lucas looked at her thoughtfully and asked one final question before the evening ended. If tonight had never started with a lie, do you think we still would have met somehow? Mia smiled gently as she considered the question. I do not know, she admitted. But I am glad the story happened the way it did. Because sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most meaningful endings. The restaurant had grown quieter as the night continued, the earlier buzz of conversation slowly fading into the softer rhythm of late evening diners finishing their meals. Mia Parker sat with Lucas Whitmore for a few more minutes after their plates had been cleared, her fingers still lightly holding the business card he had placed in front of her. The small piece of paper felt strangely significant, as if it represented more than just a job opportunity. It represented the turning point of a night that had begun with deception and somehow ended with honesty. Lucas glanced toward the tall windows overlooking the city street where traffic had thinned and the glow of streetlights reflected across the wet pavement. "It looks like the rain finally stopped," he said calmly. Mia followed his gaze and nodded. "That might be the first lucky thing that happened tonight," she said with a small smile. Lucas chuckled softly before standing and placing a few bills neatly inside the leather folder the waiter had left earlier. Mia instinctively reached for her purse. "I should at least contribute something," she said. Lucas gently raised one hand. "Tonight was technically my blind date. Allow me to keep that part traditional." Mia laughed quietly and relaxed back into her chair for a moment before standing as well. As they walked toward the restaurant entrance together, the warm light of the dining room slowly gave way to the cooler glow of the lobby. Outside the large glass doors, the air felt fresh and calm after the earlier rain. When they stepped onto the sidewalk, the city looked different than it had when Mia first arrived hours earlier. The tension she had carried with her into the restaurant had slowly dissolved during the long conversation at the table. Lucas paused near the curb and turned toward her. "I am glad you decided to stay tonight instead of leaving after the truth came out," he said. Mia tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and smiled softly. "I almost did leave," she admitted. Lucas raised an eyebrow with curiosity. "What changed your mind?" Mia looked at him thoughtfully. "You did." Lucas seemed slightly surprised by the answer. Mia continued quietly. "When someone treats you with kindness after discovering a mistake you made, it makes you want to become a better version of yourself." Lucas studied her expression for a moment and nodded slowly. "I believe that kindness tends to reveal who people really are." Mia glanced down at the business card still in her hand. "I will call the program director tomorrow," she said. Lucas smiled. "I hope you do." For a brief moment, they both stood there on the quiet sidewalk without speaking. The strange evening they had shared was beginning to reach its natural end. A black car passed slowly along the street while the distant sound of traffic echoed between tall buildings. Lucas finally broke the silence. "May I ask you one more question before we say goodnight?" Mia looked up curiously. "Of course." Lucas spoke with calm sincerity. "Now that you know the truth about tonight, would you ever consider meeting again under more ordinary circumstances?" Mia felt a gentle warmth spread through her chest. The question was simple, but it carried the quiet possibility of something new beginning. She thought about the chaotic way the night had started, the lies, the unexpected honesty, and the strange connection that had formed between two people who should never have met this way. Then she smiled. "I think that might be the most normal idea this evening has offered," she said softly. Lucas returned the smile. "Good." Mia glanced down the street where the subway entrance stood a short walk away. "I should head home before the train stopped running," she said. Lucas nodded understandingly. He stepped aside slightly as she began to walk toward the corner. Then she paused and turned back. For a moment, Lucas Whitmore was still standing beneath the glow of the restaurant lights, watching her with the same calm expression he had shown all evening. Mia lifted the business card slightly in her hand. "Thank you for giving a stranger a second chance tonight," she said. Lucas replied quietly. "Sometimes strangers become important parts of our story when we least expect it." Mia nodded once before continuing toward the subway entrance, unaware that the path ahead of her might lead to far more than a simple job interview. Because somewhere beyond this unusual evening, a new chapter was already beginning to unfold. The subway ride home that night felt strangely quiet to Mia Parker. She sat near the window of the late train as it rattled beneath the streets of Manhattan, the business card Lucas Whitmore had given her resting carefully between her fingers. Only a few hours earlier, she had walked into the Whitmore Grand Restaurant with a simple mission: humiliate a billionaire, collect the money, walk away. Instead, she had walked out of the restaurant with something far more unexpected: a second chance. The following morning, sunlight filled the small apartment Mia had struggled to keep for months. The place was modest, with a narrow kitchen, a small couch, and a desk covered with sketchbooks and scattered pencils. Mia sat at the desk staring once more at the card that displayed the name Lucas Whitmore and the contact information for his community outreach program. For a long moment she hesitated. Then she reached for her phone and made the call. The interview took place 3 days later inside a bright office located within one of Lucas Whitmore's company buildings. The program director, a calm and thoughtful woman named Sarah Coleman, listened carefully as Mia explained her background, her work experience, and her passion for drawing and community projects. At the end of the meeting, Sarah smiled warmly. "We are looking for someone who understands the struggles many families face," she said. "Your perspective could be very valuable here." 1 week later, Mia received the call that changed everything. She had been hired as a coordinator for the art education program that provided creative workshops for young patients in community hospitals across the city. The job did not make her wealthy, but it gave her stability, purpose, and the opportunity to use her creativity to help others. Several weeks passed before Mia saw Lucas Whitmore again. One evening she was helping organize art supplies in a hospital classroom when the door opened quietly behind her. When she turned around, Lucas was standing there watching the children painting at the long tables across the room. "I wanted to see how the program was going," he said with a calm smile. Mia laughed softly. "You probably could have asked someone in the office instead of showing up in person." Lucas shrugged gently. "I was curious to see how the story continued." Mia glanced around the room, where several children were proudly holding up colorful drawings. "It is going better than I ever expected," she said. Lucas watched the scene for a moment before turning back to her. "I had a feeling it might." They walked together through the quiet hallway after the workshop ended. The atmosphere between them felt comfortable and natural, very different from the tension of the night they first met. Mia stopped near the exit doors and looked at him with a thoughtful smile. "You know something strange," she said. Lucas tilted his head. "What is that?" Mia folded her arms lightly. "That blind date you were supposed to regret might actually be the best decision I accidentally made." Lucas laughed quietly. "I was thinking the same thing." For a moment neither of them spoke. The quiet understanding between them said more than words could. Lucas finally broke the silence. "Mia, would you like to have dinner with me again sometime? This time without secret plans or envelopes of money involved." Mia smiled warmly. "I think that sounds like a much better beginning for a second date." As they stepped outside together into the cool evening air, Mia realized something important. The night she had been hired to destroy had instead built something new. Not because of money or power, but because two strangers had chosen honesty when it mattered most. And sometimes the most meaningful love stories begin with the most unexpected mistakes.